So
Hey
nice to see
everyone. Yeah,
people
I feel like
joining in. I hope everyone loved the book.
you have a
What?
surprise guest. I'm not Allison, even though I think that's what my Zoom name says.
Oh yeah, we haven't told everyone we had a mystery guest today.
I know it's me, but at this point, I guess I'm not probably a mystery to most of y'all. Hello.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Can you hear us
how are you?
okay?
Great. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. This is so exciting.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me. I'm so sorry. I finished my Passover Seder like 3 minutes ago, and I'm like, okay, all
Oh,
right, let's go.
that's interesting. So yeah, I guess does that start today?
It started last night, so this is
Okay.
second night Seder.
Okay.
Okay.
And is it I've heard some people just have the one and then some people have the two. Is that correct?
So, in Israel, you only have one night. Outside of Israel, it's traditional to do 2 nights because in the old days they didn't know like when exactly the first day was going to be. So they just added a second night, and they were like, like if we'll probably hit it on the right date if we just do two. So, even though now we have like calendars and GPS and stuff, like it doesn't matter. We just still do two anywhere outside of Israel. So,
Okay, that's great. And I saw that you're from Massachusetts. I was just there last week. So what part of Massachusetts are you from?
oh, cool. I'm from Texas originally, but I've been living in Massachusetts. I'm in the Boston suburbs in a little town called Sharon.
Okay.
Where were
Yeah.
you?
We went to I went to the Hamptons Whodunit Festival in New
Mhm.
York, and then we went up through Connecticut and Rhode Island. We went to Plainville
Mhm.
and then went to
Oh, to
Boston.
go see An Unlikely Story.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I'm like 20 minutes from Plainville. So yeah, you were very much in my neighborhood. My town is exactly halfway between Boston and Providence. So
Oh, that's real close then to Plainville. And Hillary's from there too.
The North Shore of Boston, so near Gloucester and Essex
oh
and
yeah. North
Bridgeport.
Shore.
So the North Shore. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
The 128 corridor.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're right off of 95. So yeah.
Oh, that's so fun. Well, I'm so excited to get us started. Surprise. I'm a little surprise guest. My name is Hillary Yancey. I'm the director of operations here at Fabled, and I read this book and loved it, and I'm just really excited. And I hope y'all are also really excited to hear from Elizabeth Gonzalez James, the writer of The Bullet Swallower. Just a heads up for everybody in our book club, we expect that you've all written the book, so spoilers may abound. Just be prepared for that. And I will hand it over to Elizabeth to officially introduce our speaker, Elizabeth.
All right. Now, do you go by Elizabeth too? Are you?
I do. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I only let one person on earth call me Liz.
I have two friends who call me Lizzie, and that's it. So
Mhm.
yeah, that was a rule in my house. So Elizabeth Gonzalez James is the author of the novel Mona at Sea, as well as the chapbook Five Conversations About Peter Sellers. Her stories and essays have appeared in the Idaho Review, Southern Humanities Review, the Rumpus, Story South, Pank, and elsewhere, and have received numerous Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominations. Originally from South Texas, Elizabeth lives with her family in Massachusetts. So we are so happy to have you tonight. I know, just to let our guests know, you came to Fabled about 2 months ago, 3 months ago.
Yeah, it was January, so
Yeah,
3 months ago.
months
Yeah.
ago. And everyone here just absolutely loved you. I know Peyton does such a great job interviewing you. And we thought we want to introduce this book to our wider audience. So we were just thrilled that you can meet us tonight and can't wait to talk about The Bullet Swallower.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for reading the book and just for doing such an amazing job of putting on incredible events for Waco. I had never been to Waco, and I was absolutely blown away with Fabled and with the whole town. It's such a lovely community. So I felt really very blessed to have been a part of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. We always say we just need to get authors in the store one time. They fall in love and want to come back. So the longer we stay open, maybe we get more and more authors. So we're thrilled. Can you, some of us may have read the book quite a while ago. So before we get started, can you kind of give a plot synopsis, my earring just fell out, of the book, just to remind everyone about the story?
Yeah, so The Bullet Swallower is a magical realism Western. It is loosely based on the true story of my great-grandfather. He was a bandido who was chased down by the Texas Rangers and shot in the face, and he was left for dead. But he lived, and afterwards, people started calling him the Bullet Swallower. So I took that little nugget of truth and I turned it into a novel. And so in the novel, we find our protagonist, Antonio Sonoro, in 1895, and he gets this idea to rob a train. He believes that it's filled with gold and all these other treasures. He gets his brother Hugo to go with him to rob the train. The robbery goes awry, and the two brothers land in the crosshairs of the Texas Rangers. And it launches Antonio into a journey that endangers not only his life and his family's life, but also his immortal soul. That's kind of where the magical realism part of the story comes in. We find out that he is being tailed sort of by this supernatural figure named Remedio, who is following Antonio because he needs to collect a cosmic debt.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you said that this is based on your great grandfather's life, or sort of a nugget from it. And you write at one point, everything in the book is true except for the things you made up. I'd love to know a little bit more about that process for you, kind of how you took something true and then built on it. How do you think about sort of this as reflecting on your own family history, but also maybe being something like spun away from that? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, so I originally intended to use real names and real facts, real events, real everything. And I was going to tell the story as much as I could truthfully, and only add in little details like where I needed to because, history was missing or whatever. And it honestly, I didn't get very far because I did have so little to go on. And I found sticking to the truth, like, honestly, very limiting. I'm a fiction writer. I like to make stuff up. Like, if I told you, I went to the store and I bought, a dozen eggs, that's a boring story. If I said I went to the store and there was a robbery while I was trying to buy eggs, like, that's just a better story. So I would rather tell that one. And so, I'm here to entertain people, and I'm also here to tell the best possible version of the story. So, after messing around with it for like a year, I said, okay, I can just completely depart from the truth. I'm going to make up new names, new characters, new history. And yet within that, though, I did a ton of historical research, and there is quite a lot that happens in the book that's based on real events. So, for instance, I found this incredible book called can't remember what it's called. I found this incredible book of letters from an early settler in Corpus Christi, which is my hometown. And she was a German woman who moved to the city when it was like maybe 5 houses. And she would talk about, oh, there's a drought and there's 10,000 dead cattle along the Nueces. And then in the next sentence, she's like, oh, and my muslin still hasn't come in from New Orleans, and the crops aren't doing good. And she just like would skip over this thing to me that I was like, wait, what? I'm sorry. There were 10,000 dead cattle lining the banks of the Nueces River. So I pulled things like that from my historical research and seeded it into the novel, and and then tied it up with things that I made up. Another thing that I took from history, I did a deep genealogical dive into my family, into my dad's side of the family tree. And my dad was born in Mexico. His family is they're all Mexican, going back hundreds of years. In digging into their history, I found out that many hundreds of years ago, they owned a gold mine. And you don't need to know a ton about Latin American history to kind of guess that working conditions in your average like 18th century Mexican gold mine were very bad. The workers were treated terribly. And this is kind of the weird way my brain works. When I read that, I thought, if anything bad happens to me, I had it coming for what my ancestors did. And that's not logical. And that's not even really, I think, how things work. But I kind of leaned into that intuition about descendants having to pay for the crimes of their ancestors. And so again, it was like rooted in truth, but I expanded on it and embellished it and made it into a better story. And that really laid a lot of the groundwork also for the novel. So yeah, everything in the book is true except for the stuff I made up. So
I love it. Well, so many Western novels are told from the white perspective, either cowboys or frontier women. Was it important to you to tell this story from the Mexican perspective, from a Mexican perspective?
yeah, I always was going to tell the story centered on my great grandfather, and just like him being Mexican, like I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about the viewpoint. It was always going to be a story told from the point of view of a Mexican man. But I did, very quickly come to understand that Texas history, as I had been taught it in school, and I'm 42, so this is like 10,000 years ago when I went to school, but we were taught that the Texas Rangers were the good guys, and they had to come in and like tame the Wild West and restore law and order to a lawless part of the state. And when you read a lot of books about the Texas Rangers, that is still very much like how the story is presented. But in researching this book, I started reading a lot of accounts written by Mexican Americans who were alive at the time. This would be the 1870s to like the 1930s. They tell the story very differently. The Texas Rangers, would not always do the due diligence to figure out if the bandido that they were pursuing was actually the person who committed a crime, or, sometimes they would just shoot a Mexican person who kind of fit the description, and then they would say, okay, job done. And meanwhile, there's an innocent person who's been killed. And so there was quite a bit of speculation also that the Texas Rangers would occasionally remove people from their homes who legitimately owned them if they were Mexican, because the land was desired by a white person who wanted to be on that land. And it wasn't just the Texas Rangers, the judges, the judicial system was very eager to cooperate in this kind of thing too. Kind of making up laws or eminent domain or whatever to get people out of their homes. And so there was some of that going on as well. And I talk about that a little bit in the novel. And yeah, I felt honestly pretty bad that I didn't know that side of the story until I started researching the book. And I was like, why weren't we taught this in school, where, history is written by the victors, right? Like why weren't we also told about all this other stuff that was happening? If you Google like lynchings of Mexican Americans in Texas, it's just devastating, the numbers of how many people were murdered. yeah, so it was really important to kind of show that side of the story and to talk about that stuff because it's fact. It's not this isn't, I think people want to say like it's history like reimagined. It isn't history reimagined, it's like just history. And you know, there's photographic evidence, there's like journalistic evidence of these things happening. So yeah, it was important for me to tell that truth, that side of the story.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. Can everybody still hear me okay? Switched out my
Right.
great. Okay. I was wondering, so your book has been described as comparable to someone like Cormac McCarthy or Larry McMurtry. And sort of in this Western genre, it tends to be kind of dominated by male authors. Maybe we might think of it as kind of a boys' club. I wonder about kind of how you enter that space as a female writer, what kind of you think that brings maybe kind of to the genre as a whole, but also maybe how you think about portraying your female characters and how that kind of works in terms of your perspective and maybe in comparison to what's come before you in the genre.
Yeah, I absolutely love Cormac McCarthy. I love Larry McMurtry. If you haven't read Lonesome Dove, like please read it. It should be required reading for every Texan. That book is incredible. So I think what I bring to this book as a woman who's writing these like incredibly violent male characters, I had originally intended to write a book that was like a swashbuckling revenge story. I had Quentin Tarantino like very much top of mind during early drafts. I'm thinking of, you know, revenge is a big theme for him, if it's Kill Bill or Inglourious Bastards or what have you. So I was thinking of that kind of story, but I knew implicitly, and I think this comes from not being a man, perhaps. I knew that revenge was never going to be the end of the story. And I apologize if people haven't finished the book, but you know, Antonio vows to kill the 3 Texas Rangers who shot him. And he goes off on this quest for revenge. And when he fulfills that vow, he feels empty. And it's because there's just no way that feels good. There's no way that in any way gives you closure. I just don't believe it. I mean, I've never killed anybody, but I just believe this as a human being, that I don't think that killing somebody because they wronged you is going to be the end of your healing, the end of your story. There's no closure that I can see there. And so my book doesn't end with that. It keeps going. And it keeps because Antonio's arc is not done. And so we keep going after the killings into what happens like later in his life. And that's where he gets the closure. It's when he lets go of the violence and the pain and the anger and all of this stuff. And that's where the closure comes from. It's you don't just point the trigger and like all of your, or pull the trigger and all your problems go away. The problems go away with like very slow passage of time and reflection and very small but conscious choices like made again and again and again. And that's not sexy for a movie. But that is what I believe. And so yeah, so I think that's what I bring to like the boys club as a female writer. Is a rejection of violence as an answer to problems. And as far as my female characters, I had originally a lot more women in the book, and they just had to go over drafts because they just sadly like weren't that central to the story. And but the ones that were left behind, especially Cielita, She's somebody who had a terrible thing happen to her, and true to the time and true to who she was, she blames herself for it. She was raped as a teenager, but she really like internalized the blame for that. And I think that I really struggled with like how to talk about with how to write that part of it, because I'm a person in the 2020s writing this, and my audience is, you know, in 2024 reading this. So we have very different ideas of rape and who's to blame, you know, versus her in the 1800s, like how she would have internalized that. But I think that I think I tried to strike a balance between writing a character who was had a enough awareness to know that she didn't hold all the blame, but was contextually like of her present moment so that she did hold some. I don't know if that makes sense, but I tried to do right by the female characters who were in the book, but they're also Mexican women boxed in by an incredibly patriarchal, like rigidly Catholic society. And I was always trying to be mindful of that. I couldn't just have a character who was like F the patriarchy, you know, like that wasn't going to happen. Not back then. So
I feel like it contributes to that kind of you're wanting to tell a magical realism story, but it's so deeply rooted in the history. You have to be like deeply true to what still needs to be redeemed, or what we're kind of still working on redeeming. And if you were to try to show it without like the sort of historical part, we'd miss the way the book kind of invites us to think about the history we're still undoing or making some kind of redemption.
Yeah. And I mean, there are still a lot of women who have had terrible things happen to them, and they still, you know, shoulder a lot of blame. So I was also aware that this is not exactly an issue that's like left back in the 1800s. This is still very much of our present time as well, sadly. So, yeah.
And I appreciate you writing it that way, because I have read books that take place in the 1800s where the woman, you know, on the frontier is saying, I don't need a man. Like, actually, you probably do, you know, during that time. So I appreciate you writing that way.
Yeah. I mean, we want to. I'm not saying that those women didn't exist. I'm sure they did, but I believe they would have been very much outside of the norm. I mean, you just would want somebody around, you know, I don't know, to fight off a bear or something. Like you got safety in numbers. So yeah.
Well, you're right. Of course, I love your author's note. I always love a good author's note. It's always one of my favorite parts of the book. But you talk about really not knowing when you started. Was it like 2016? Knowing nothing, or 2015, knowing nothing about magical realism, westerns, Mexican movie stars, and life along the Texas-Mexico border and Mexico City. So this is kind of a multifaceted question. So feel free to just answer what you want to. But first of all, I would love to know why you decided to add a magical realism element to the story. I mean, it was fantastic, but what was the process like of that? And how did you kind of wrap your head around all of these things that you needed to really delve into before you started your novel?
Yeah, I've been asked a few times about why I chose to make it magical realism, and my memory is not that great. And I sadly, I think if I had to give an answer, it would just be, I thought it would be cool. And that's not like a super satisfying answer, but I don't remember the process being super deliberative. I think my first novel was like super realist. The other like short stories that I've written have been or up to that point had been very like grounded in realism, and I think I just wanted to try something else. And also I grew up Catholic, and like living, I grew up in Laredo, Texas also. So like right along the border. I grew up with, you know, talking about summoning Bloody Mary and La Llorona and like demon exorcism. And I lived there in the 80s during the Satanic Panic. And so I just came up with like all of these kind of like dark, spooky, like folklore things like swirling around me. And I love ghost stories. I love horror. I love aliens. I love anything that's like woo woo and weird. I am into it. That's very much my taste level. And yeah, I wanted to lean into that. And it felt appropriate to the subject matter and also the setting. Um, and I'm sorry, I forgot the second half of your question.
Well, just that there were so many things to tackle before you started, you know, what,
Yeah.
the research involved and, yeah.
I did a tremendous amount of research. If there are any aspiring authors in the audience, absolutely do not follow my lead. But I read between like 50 and 60 books to get ready to write this book. That's way too much research. The amazing thing about research is it counts as work, but you don't have to write anything at all. So some authors like me who procrastinate exceptionally well, love research because you get to do it forever and you never have to really do anything. So yeah, I read books about all of it, fiction, nonfiction. I also, this is kind of a tangent, but also kind of not. I in all the drafts of the book between 2016 and 2021, when I sent it to, when I went on, when I queried my agent to try to get representation to sell it, the book was over 500 pages long. And so the Jaime character, the grandson, movie star character, he was 50% of the book. And his story, as I had written it, and as I had always intended it, was he goes to Dorado, he films the movie, we watch him film the movie, he cheats on his wife, he uncovers this gun smuggling plot, like Fidel Castro is hanging around because it's the early 60s. There's also this like international dam that's being built along the Rio Grande, and then like the town floods and like all this stuff. So I had subplots upon subplots upon subplots. And so a lot of my research was figuring all that out and trying to hold this big like 8-armed octopus like clear in my head. And it was all for naught because my agent was like, you have to throw 50% of the book out. And I did.
Oh my goodness.
Sometimes that's just the process. But I do know a lot about dam construction in the 1960s. So who knows? Maybe
You're
it'll.
fun at parties.
I'm so fun at parties. I hope I get on Jeopardy in the category as like mid-century dams.
Sounds appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
I love that. Well, speaking of kind of this multi-generational perspective, and I'm sort of sad we lost 50% of his story, but I'm curious about sort of a central premise of your book is the idea that subsequent generations carry on both memory, but maybe some responsibility for kind of what came before them. It reminded me a little bit, I don't know if you were thinking about this, of kind of Questions in the Brothers Karamazov and some of those other kinds of books about like, what does it mean to be responsible for something? And so I wonder if you can talk about just a little bit this central idea. Do you think, how are subsequent generations responsible for the atrocities kind of committed by their ancestors? What does it look like to take that responsibility? Obviously, in the book, you have a unique device sort of for Antonio to actually physically like agree to take on the cosmic debt. But what does that look like for those of us who don't have a magical realism element? How do you think about that?
Yeah. That question of the book, can we be better than our forebears? And like, what do we owe? That arose like over drafting. And I think I think it arose out of just me like being alive in the years, 2016 to 2022, when there was an incredible amount of discussion about institutionalized racism, the Me Too movement, reparations, meddling in Central America, and CIA meddling in Central America, and how that kind of spawned the crisis that we have now along the Texas-Mexico border, et cetera, et cetera. And can we be better than our forebears is, I think, the central question of like American society right now. And I think I realized that a little bit at a time, like going on through drafts of the book, until it kind of hit me like, yeah, that's what this book is all about. And so in terms of carrying a debt forward, there in the Bible, I quote Exodus in the book. It says that the sins of the forefathers will be carried in the third and fourth generation. Now, so I converted to Judaism. I said that I grew up Catholic. So what in Judaism, how that would be interpreted is that it is incumbent upon parents to teach their children how to be a good person, because evil deeds spread far beyond like just the person that the evil is done to. If you if you're a drunk driver and you kill somebody by accident, that has repercussions. It just ripples out to, you don't even know how many people that action like eventually touches. And so it is incumbent on us not only to live virtuously, but to also teach our children and subsequent generations, like just the power that bad deeds have. I believe I'm getting that right. I'm certainly not a rabbi, but I feel like that's what I've read in Torah interpretations about that particular quote. And I actually don't know like what the Christian interpretation of that quote would be. So I don't know if anybody in the audience maybe has a different or more nuanced interpretation of that. I'm always like super interested in different interpretations of Bible verses. Anyways, so that's where that came from, the idea of this debt carrying forward. And I took the Bible literally for the purposes of the book, that this debt literally is being passed on to the subsequent generations. And yeah, we're living with decisions that our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents made. Like, look at climate change. Like, oh, if we could like build a time machine and just go back and say like, don't use leaded gasoline, don't put forever chemicals in the drinking water, like all this stuff. And now we're saddled with that burden. And like, how do we deal with that? Well, first of all, you acknowledge it. There are so many things in this world that we can't even acknowledge that the bad thing was done. We can't even look at it in the face. And but it first starts with acknowledging it. And what happens after that, I don't know. I'm a fiction writer. Like, I'm not a policy expert or anything, but a lot of it just has to come down to just tell the truth. Just tell the truth about honestly what happened. That would go a long way, I think.
Well, it feels a little bit like, he gets this opportunity to confront the debt itself in the form of the kind of, I'm not really sure what you would call him, who's been pursuing him kind of all throughout. And that's the thing we, in a way, we don't get, because we don't really have the kind of same mechanism you can have in fiction to do that kind of direct confrontation with our sort of ancestral inheritance. But it's the same principle of acknowledgement. And yeah, I find that really interesting. It reminds me of I think this is in some of Chaim Potok's work too, the idea that, if you destroy a single life, you've actually destroyed like an entire world. And that's
Yes.
really strong kind of throughout that. And that's so clear, like as you're talking about that, I can see that so clearly in this book, that the idea is that these singular actions are never singular actions.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah. Yeah. And conversely, if you save one life, it is as if you have saved the whole world. That's a very common Jewish precept. And when I converted, I took all of that stuff like very seriously. And yeah, I find that kind of thinking, it really resonates with me. So yeah, it was funny. My agent, um, I converted in 2021, so I was deep into this book by the time I decided to convert. And my agent said, wait, so you started the book Catholic, but you finished it Jewish? And I said, yeah, like I think the book actually in a lot of ways also influenced my decision to convert. I've tried writing about it, but I'm not quite ready, I think, to put pen to paper on exactly like how that happened. But in constructing the moral universe of this book, it forced me to clarify to myself like how I think the universe works and how I think everything fits or doesn't. And that actually did lead me eventually to Judaism. So
Interesting. Well, yeah, when I read the book and then I heard you were a Jewish woman from Massachusetts, I got a little, it took me a second to go, okay, but that makes a lot of sense. Well, can you talk a little bit about your writing journey, where, what made you decide to be an author, and kind of it seems like, I mean, I know you wrote Mona at Sea, but this book really has kind of exploded. So can you talk a little bit about your thought, I want to be an author, to where you are today?
yeah, my journey was incredibly circuitous and indirect. I decided to go back to school in the mid 2000s to get an MBA. I just wanted to make a lot of money, and I thought business school was a good way to do that. And so I enrolled in business school. I was studying finance, and I decided I just want an entry-level job in corporate finance. So I wasn't like aiming for the stars, just, kind of aiming right for the lower middle. And I graduated in 2008. So this is, the winter of 2008. So this is a couple months after Countrywide closed, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns. I apologize for any background noise. My 11-year-old son is kicking up a fit about going to bed right now. So if you
I can't hear
screaming,
anything.
that's what it is. Anyway, so all these banks closed, and I spent all of 2009 applying for jobs, and I applied for between 300 and 400 jobs in 2009, and I didn't get anything, nada. I couldn't even get a part-time receptionist job. My husband was also unemployed at the time. We were living in his parents' basement. And then I got pregnant. And so like mid 2010, I have a baby. We had also moved from Kansas to Oakland, California. I have a baby. I'm finally out of the in-laws basement and in an apartment. So I'm home alone. My husband did get a job, and I'm in like a foreign city, and I don't know anybody, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I started writing to like deal with the whiplash of thinking I was going to be this like career person, and then instead being a stay-at-home mom. And I had a lot of anger about the Great Recession. And like how I'm an elder millennial, geriatric millennial, if you will. I had a lot of anger about how my generation was treated during the Great Recession. And that's actually what my first book is about. But yeah, so that is how I came to writing. I just wanted a job. I just wanted a 40-hour a week normal corporate job. And it didn't happen for me. I never got a job. I ended up staying at home and raising my kids and writing. And it took like 10 years from when I started writing to when my first book got published, but it did eventually work out. So
I love it. Love a good writing success story.
So fun. I feel like that's, yeah, I feel like the best jobs in a way are the ones you fall into. My background is in philosophy, and now I get to talk to authors and sell magical realism books, which is so.
Mhm.
I'm a speech pathologist.
I know. Look at us. Like we all wanted semi-normal jobs, and then we wound up in book world.
That's right.
Yeah.
Speaking of
Well,
books-
the bonus though is I can read The Economist and the Wall Street Journal, and I understand 100% of what they're saying. So it wasn't all for naught.
I love that. Okay, speaking of books, tell us 3 books that you absolutely love and think everybody should read. And it could be in this genre, but it could also just be 3 books you absolutely recommend.
Yeah. So one that is in this genre that everybody should read is a magical realism book called Pedro Paramo. If I'm trying to say it phonetically, the author's name is Juan Rulfo. He's a Mexican author. He only wrote 2 books, I think, and but they are like required reading in Mexican high schools, and he's like one of Mexico's most revered authors. And that book, Pedro Paramo, was actually the book that it came out in the 1950s. And it was the book that inspired Gabriel Garcia Marquez to start writing magical realism. So that book is incredible.
I just ordered 3 for the store.
Oh, amazing.
Okay.
Another one, of course, the minute you say what's a good book, I'm like, what's a book? I've never read a book. Another one I really loved, this one's just random and recent, Portrait of a Mirror by A. Natasha Jukovsky. So this is this writer's debut novel, and it's a comedy of manners set in modern day Manhattan. And it's about these kind of unpleasantly rich management consultants who are involved in this like infidelity sort of like not a triad, more of like a quad 4-way like love triangle. Anyways, and it's so funny because her characters are management consultants, their whole deal is like being deliberative and going through every little nuance of their entire thought process and justifying it. And it is the best novel I've ever read that like at character motivation, because you sit there and like watch all of their motivations in real time, and it's just funny. And I thought it was incredible. And another one that I love. Oh my God, what's a book? I'm staring at my bookshelf right now. Oh, this one was fun. Butts, A Backstory by Heather Radke. It is a history of the rear end. And like why are we so obsessed with butts? She talks about Sir Mix-a-Lot. She talks about like the kind of racist obsession with Black women's backsides in the 1800s. She talks about J-Lo's booty, all of it. So yeah, Butts, A Backstory.
That is totally not what I was expecting you to
I
say.
know. I was totally right.
Look at the cover, Google the cover. It's
Well, you know I'm
funny.
going to. You know I'm going to. Okay, and we always have to ask, what are you working on next?
Yeah, so remember when I said that I had to throw 250 pages of the book away?
Mhm.
So I am turning a little tiny nugget of those discarded pages into a standalone novel. So it's not a sequel and it's not magical realism, but it is set in Mexico City in the 1960s, and that's wonderful because I have to do zero research. And it's called Letter to My Husband's Mistress, and it is, as the title says, a letter written by the wife of a movie star to the young starlet that her husband is having an affair with. And it's a very like feminist, very like sexy, I hope, story about the ways that women were boxed in the mid-century and the kind of ways that they were able to move around these like very constricting roles that society had placed them in. And it's going to be, I think, a lot more sex and a lot less guns. So it'll be quite different from this one.
That's so exciting. Oh gosh, I'm already excited. I love that you are so willing as a writer to experiment across genres. We're going to get magical realism. We're going to get something totally different in historical fiction. I
Mm-hmm.
can't. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was just a total delight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Such a pleasure. I want to remind everybody who is here that next month we will be back with our book club again. And I know Kai can throw the link to that.
I want to announce it though. I'm excited.
Okay, well, Elizabeth, take it away. Who is it?
Okay, we are going to get to talk to Kristen Hanna, who wrote The Women. And of course, it's just an absolutely phenomenal book. There'll be a great discussion. The only difference, I talked to Kristen and she's been so busy on her tour, but she said she'd love to talk to our group, but we need to make it 1 hour earlier. So next month it'll be May the 14th, but it'll be at 6 o'clock and we will send out lots of reminders about that. But it'll just be an hour earlier. And we said, Kristen, whatever you want, we will make it happen. So we're very excited about that. And again, just so thankful, Elizabeth, to have gotten to speak to you and just loved the book and loved selling it at Fabled.
Yes. Oh, thank y'all so much. And have a wonderful night. And again, thank you. Anytime. It was my pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. And we'll see you all soon.
Good night.
Night.